I publicly humiliated my boyfriend for a cheap laugh. He vanished, and now I'm living in a special kind of hell. The silence is what woke me up. Not the brutal Sunday morning sunlight stabbing through the blinds, not the jackhammer of my hangover pounding against the inside of my skull, but the silence. It was a thick, heavy, wrong kind of quiet. The kind of quiet that absorbs all other sounds. Usually, by now, I'd hear the soft hiss of the espresso machine or the gentle, almost inaudible strumming of Jasper's acoustic guitar from the living room. Instead, there was nothing, just the buzz of my own blood in my ears. My mouth felt like a desert as I stumbled out of bed, pulling on one of his old, discarded band t-shirts. The first thing that registered was the wall next to the turntable. It looked like a smile with missing teeth. Where Jasper's meticulously curated vinyl collection used to be, a library of obscure indie pressings, vintage jazz, and post-punk eps, there were just gaps. Ugly, rectangular voids of painted drywall. He'd taken them all. All that was left were my records, a small, embarrassingly bright collection of top 40 pop that now looked garish and lonely. A cold dread, colder than the hardwood floor under my bare feet, began to creep up my spine. My eyes darted to the corner. His old Fender, the sunburst one he'd had since he was 16, was gone. The stand it lived on was empty, looking like a weird metal skeleton. I walked slowly, almost robotically, to the bedroom closet and slid the door open. His side was a cavern of empty hangers, clinking softly against each other. His worn-out sneakers were gone from the mat by the door. His toothbrush was gone from the holder in the bathroom. There was no note on the kitchen counter. No angry, all-caps text on my phone. Nothing. It wasn't a messy breakup. It felt like a surgical extraction, performed with unnerving precision while I was passed out. He had just excised himself from our life. I stood in the middle of the living room, the stale smell of last night's wine mingling with the dust motes dancing in the sun, and felt a weird, floaty detachment. I was a detective examining a crime scene, and the chilling realization was that I was both the victim and the weapon. We'd been together for 3 years. 3 years that, until recently, I would have described as the easiest, most grounding period of my life. Jasper was Jasper. He was a musician, but not the obnoxious, look-at-me kind. He was quiet, deeply principled, and passionate about his craft in a way that felt like an anchor in a chaotic world. I remember one of our first dates. We spent an entire Saturday in a dusty, cramped record store. And the pure, unadulterated joy on his face when he found a rare first pressing of a Nick Drake album was more electrifying than any grand, romantic gesture. He worked a day job in a quiet bookstore to pay the bills, but his real life happened in our small spare room that he'd converted into a studio. He had this almost monastic devotion to music he considered real. To him, authenticity was a religion. It was the core of his personality, the thing I first fell in love with. He saw the world in stark terms. Things were either genuine or they were bullshit. There was no in-between. Then, 6 months ago, I was promoted to account manager at a boutique advertising agency. It wasn't just a new title. It was an entry visa into a new social stratosphere. This world was curated by Camilla, our impossibly cool and intimidating creative director. Her inner circle was composed of people who spoke in a language of ironic detachment and niche cultural references I had to Google later. They didn't just have opinions. They had meticulously constructed tastes. At after-work drinks, they'd dissect the semiotics of a new A24 film or debate the merits of brutalist architecture. I, with my love for blockbuster movies and mainstream novels, felt like a tourist with a fanny pack and a map. I remember one evening, Camilla casually asked me what I was listening to lately, and when I nervously mumbled something about a popular indie pop band, she just gave a tight, thin smile and said, "Oh, cute," before turning away. The word cute landed like a slap. A constant, low-grade anxiety became my new normal. I was an imposter, and I was terrified of being found out. So, I started studying them like they were a final exam. I started an entire secret playlist of their minimalist techno. I bought a coffee table book about a photographer I'd never heard of. I started replacing my Zara wardrobe with overpriced, shapeless linen garments from obscure online stores. I was so desperate to be accepted, to get that nod of approval from Camilla, that I began to see my own life through their judgmental eyes. And that's when my gaze, poisoned with this new insecurity, turned to Jasper. Suddenly, his unwavering principles didn't seem charming anymore. They seemed rigid and unsophisticated. His passion for obscure bands felt less like a cool hobby and more like a social liability. I started flinching when he'd put on one of his favorite records if I had a work friend coming over. "Can't we just listen to something more neutral?" I'd ask, and he'd just look at me, confused. The things that were uniquely him started to feel like things that were holding me back. One night, watching a movie where a character sells out his artistic integrity for fame, I made some cynical comment about how it was the smart move. Jasper turned to me, his expression serious in the flickering light of the TV. "You don't really believe that, do you?" he asked. I just shrugged. He was quiet for a long time before he said, "You know, the one thing I can't stand is watching someone betray what they love just to get a seat at a table they don't even belong at. It's the ugliest thing in the world." He was talking about the character on screen, but he was looking right at me. The party was at Camilla's loft, a sprawling, painfully chic space with exposed brick, towering fiddle-leaf figs, and artfully distressed furniture that probably cost more than my car. Just being there made my palms sweat. I had practically begged Jasper to come, framing it as a crucial networking event for my career, a line I knew he was too supportive to argue with. He'd agreed, reluctantly, the way he always did when I used that tone. He put on his nicest dark jeans and a simple black button-down shirt, but he still looked like himself, solid and real in a room full of people who looked like they were performing a play about being cool. I, on the other hand, was in full costume. An asymmetrical dress I'd bought on sale that was deeply uncomfortable, and a pair of architectural heels I could barely stand in. The night wore on in a haze of expensive gin and intellectual posturing. I was fluttering on the edge of Camilla's group, laughing a little too loudly at their inside jokes, feeling that familiar, desperate pull of wanting to belong. I felt like a kid on the outside of a clubhouse, peeking through the window. Jasper, bless his heart, tried. He engaged a guy in a conversation about vintage synthesizers for a solid 10 minutes, but you could see his social battery draining in real time. Eventually, he retreated to the relative safety of the snack table, nursing a beer and looking out the massive industrial window. At some point, someone put on a record, some droning, atmospheric band I'd never heard of. Camilla's friend, a guy named Julian with a stupid, meticulously waxed mustache, started pontificating. "God, the raw, lo-fi texture on this is just transcendent," he said, swirling his wine. "It's so bravely anti-commercial." Everyone nodded sagely, murmuring their agreement. That's when it happened. I was 3 drinks in, my social anxiety was at a fever pitch, and I saw my opening. It was like a switch flipped in my brain, a toxic cocktail of insecurity and alcohol. I needed to prove I was one of them, that I, too, could be casually cruel, that I understood their language of cynical superiority. And Jasper, my quiet, steadfast Jasper, became the perfect sacrifice. "Oh my God, you guys think this is lo-fi?" I announced, my voice a little too high and brittle. The group turned to me. I had their full attention. The spotlight was both terrifying and intoxicating. "You should hear the stuff my boyfriend listens to." I pointed dramatically across the room at Jasper, who looked over, a questioning smile on his face. "It's like actual, unlistenable noise," I continued, feeding off their curious smirks. "He has this one record that's literally just a guy tuning a guitar for 45 minutes. He calls it deconstructed Americana." I did a goofy, exaggerated impression of him, closing my eyes and nodding my head to a non-existent beat, a caricature of his genuine enjoyment twisted into something idiotic. The group chuckled. It was working. And the collecting, don't even get me started. He once spent our entire vacation budget on a super rare 7-inch from some band that broke up after one show in 1993. The lie slipped out so easily. We hadn't even planned a vacation. I was like, "Babe, what about Santorini?" And he was like, "But this has the original sleeve." For the grand finale, I invented my cruelest flourish. I swear, he almost missed my sister's wedding because he was in a bidding war on eBay for a cassette tape. A cassette tape. His best man speech was 5 minutes late because he had to confirm his PayPal. The group erupted in laughter. It was exactly what I wanted. Sharp, validating, cruel laughter that made me feel like I was finally on the inside. Camilla actually smiled at me, a real, conspiratorial smile this time. "Fiona, you're hilarious," she said, clinking her glass against mine. In that moment, bathed in their approval, I felt a dizzying sense of victory. I had finally gotten the joke right. Then, through the haze of gin and self-congratulation, I looked across the room and met Jasper's eyes. He wasn't angry. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't even embarrassed. He was just watching me with a look of absolute, soul-crushing clarity. It was the look you'd give a complete stranger who had just revealed themselves to be someone you could never, ever trust. The faint, questioning smile was gone, replaced by a complete blankness. He just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head, set his half-finished beer down, and turned away. The cab ride home was a tomb. The silence was so absolute it felt louder than the party's music. I kept replaying the laughter in my head, the feeling of Camilla's approval, but the high was gone, replaced by a sour, curdling feeling in my stomach. I tried to bridge the chasm between us. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding flimsy. "You're not actually mad, are you? It was just a joke, I was just riffing." Jasper didn't even turn to look at me. He just stared out the window at the blurry city lights. "Just drop it, Fiona." "No, I won't drop it. You're being overly sensitive. It's what people do at parties, they tell funny stories." He finally turned his head, and in the dim, shifting light of the street lamps, his face was a mask. "My stories are mine to tell," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "You don't get to turn my life into a punchline for people you don't even like." When we got back to the apartment, the tense silence followed us inside. I expected him to go to the couch, or for us to have a huge, screaming fight. I was prepared for that. What I wasn't prepared for was the calm. He walked straight into our bedroom, and I heard the distinct, sickening sound of wheels rolling across the hardwood floor. He was pulling his suitcase out from under the bed. My blood ran cold. The last dregs of my drunken bravado evaporated. "What are you doing?" I asked, standing frozen in the doorway. He didn't answer. He just opened the closet and began taking his shirts off their hangers in neat, efficient stacks. It was methodical, unhurried. That was the most terrifying part. This wasn't a decision made in anger, it was an action being executed. "Jasper, stop it. This is insane," I pleaded, my voice starting to crack. "It was a stupid, stupid joke. I'm sorry, I was drunk and trying to fit in." I reached out to grab his arm, and he flinched away from my touch as if I were red hot. He paused his packing and finally looked at me. His eyes were clear, and that was the worst part. There was no anger, no pain, just a profound and final disappointment. "It wasn't a joke, Fiona," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an impossible weight. "Tonight, you stood in a room full of strangers, and you broadcasted to all of them that you are ashamed of me. You're ashamed of the things I love, the things that make me who I am." He picked up a stack of t-shirts and placed them in the suitcase. "I can handle a lot. I can handle arguments. I can handle bad moods, but I will not be with someone who is ashamed of me." He zipped the suitcase shut with a sound that felt like a guillotine. "So that's it," I whispered, tears now streaming down my face. 3 years and you're just leaving, over one stupid comment." He picked up his guitar case from the corner. "It was never about the comment," he said, walking past me towards the door. "It was about the laughter you were so desperate to get." And then he was gone. I ran to the door, but he was already halfway down the hall. I called his name. He never looked back. I immediately tried to call his phone. It went straight to voicemail. I sent a frantic, typo-riddled text. It never delivered. He had cut the cord. Instantly and completely. The next few days were a blur of unreality. I existed in a fog of panic and disbelief, moving through my apartment like a ghost. Every empty space screamed his absence. The dent in his side of the sofa, the hook where his jacket used to hang, the deafening silence where his music used to be. I kept expecting him to walk through the door, for this to have been some grand, dramatic lesson. But the door remained closed. My frantic texts remained undelivered, a string of pathetic blue bubbles floating in a digital void. My calls went to a dispassionate, automated voice. He hadn't just left, he had vanished. I tried our mutual friends. Most of them hadn't heard from him. A couple of them, his closest friends, were clearly uncomfortable. "I think he just needs some space, Fi." One of them, a guy named Owen, stammered over the phone. The unspoken message was clear. We're on his side. By Monday, I was a wreck, but I dragged myself to work, convinced that the one place where I'd sought this disastrous approval would offer some kind of solace. I needed validation. I needed someone to tell me he had overreacted, that I was the wronged party. During a coffee break, I cornered Camilla by the espresso machine, putting on my best performance of a heartbroken but bewildered victim. "It's just been the worst weekend," I began, my voice trembling on cue. "Jasper and we broke up. He just packed a bag and left." Camilla raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Oh," she said, her tone conveying mild, detached curiosity, like she was hearing about a dip in the stock market. "Yeah, it was right after your party. He got so upset about, that silly story I told. Can you believe it? He just completely overreacted." I looked at her, waiting for the wave of sympathy. The men are so dramatic, camaraderie. Instead, she took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes cool and analytical. "That's too bad," she said with a shrug. "Relationships are tough." Then she glanced at her watch. "Well, I've got to prep for the afternoon pitch. Hang in there." And she walked away, leaving me standing there, my carefully constructed narrative collapsing around me. It was worse with the others from her circle. When I tried to bring it up with Julian, he suddenly remembered an urgent email he had to send. Another colleague just gave me a tight, awkward pat on the shoulder and scurried off. They didn't rally around me. They didn't condemn Jasper. They just distanced themselves. Their polite, awkward avoidance was 1,000 times more damning than any accusation. I had made a spectacle of my relationship, sacrificed my partner's dignity for a laugh, and in doing so, I had revealed a desperate, ugly part of myself. They had seen it, and they wanted nothing to do with it. I wasn't one of them. I was just the entertainment, and the show was over. Weeks bled into a month. The apartment, once a shared space of comfort, now felt like a mausoleum I was haunting. I stopped cleaning. I let takeout containers pile up. I drank cheap wine straight from the bottle, hoping to numb the hollow ache in my chest, but it only ever sharpened the edges of my regret. Sleep was a luxury, and when it came, it was filled with dreams of the party, of the sound of their laughter and the look on Jasper's face. My obsession took on a digital form. Since he had blocked my main account on everything, I committed the ultimate act of pathetic desperation. I made a fake Instagram account, a burner. My username was a meaningless jumble of letters and numbers, the profile picture a stock photo of a sunset. It was my grimy little window back into the world he now inhabited without me. And that's where I lived now, in the hell of the infinite scroll. I'd spend hours, late into the night, my face illuminated by the sick blue light of my phone, just watching. I watched his band play a gig at a small, crowded bar I'd never been to. I saw photos of him smiling with his friends, a genuine, relaxed smile that I hadn't seen on his face in months. Every post was a fresh stab of pain, a confirmation that his life hadn't just continued without me, it had improved. The final, soul-destroying blow came last night. He posted a photo. It was just his hand holding a cup of coffee, but in the background, out of focus, was a woman's hand next to his on the table. The caption was simple. Sunday, it was everything. It was a universe in a single word, but it was the comments that truly broke me. There, nestled among the well wishes from his friends, was a comment from Camilla. "Great show the other night," it read. "You guys were amazing. Let me know when the next one is." I stared at that comment until the words blurred. Camilla, the woman whose approval I had debased myself for, the ringleader of the circus where I had played the clown. She was there, in his new life, offering the very validation I had tried to steal for myself. She hadn't just witnessed my downfall. She had effortlessly stepped over my wreckage and into his world. The irony was so brutal, so complete, it felt like a cosmic joke. I had sacrificed the one person who saw me for who I was, all for a seat at a table where they were now laughing with him. I closed my eyes, but the image was burned onto the back of my eyelids. His hand, her hand, and Camilla's name. A digital tombstone marking the grave of everything I had destroyed.